Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of Strick and Roll, a special live edition. I'm joined by a first-time guest of the pod, but I'm sure somebody that everybody that listens to this would be familiar with. His name is Kristian Winfield. He is the New York Knicks beat reporter for the New York Daily News. Kristian, how are you doing?
To be quite honest, I am full. I just stuffed my face with about 6 pieces of Church's fried chicken. I actually don't know how I'm awake right now. The itis should have taken over by now, but here we are. And I'm going to try to give you as much energy as I can, but just know I got about 4,000 calories worth of fried chicken, spicy, in my stomach brewing right now. So it's just like a ticking time bomb. At some point, my whole system's going to shut down.
You get any sides?
No, here's one thing. Church's Chicken has better biscuits than any fried chicken fast food spot. Better than Popeyes, better than KFC, better than anywhere. So that's all I need. But I knew with just the chicken alone, I was like, I'm on like this complete crazy weight loss journey. I done lost 60 pounds. And then I probably put 2 of them back on so far out here in Charleston because it's like the big back country capital of the world. So it's crazy, but no sides, just biscuits and chicken, and I'm gonna be eating a side of pillow later on today. No lie.
There you go. Well, it's great to have you on. I know that it's been a long time coming, but we had to kind of make sure that you were back on the good side since you started off with the Nets for a long time, and it was like we weren't sure for a little while, but I think you've earned your stripes now after you're on the beat here.
Yeah, I mean, listen, man, it's always going to be Brooklyn first because I'm Brooklyn born and raised. I'm not saying Brooklyn Nets first. I'm just saying Brooklyn as a borough over the other boroughs in New York City, right? Like, let's not get it twisted. Brooklyn's the #1 borough, and we can fight over that. But in terms of basketball and history and just the richness of the sport, I mean, New York City is the mecca of basketball, right? And when you think of the mecca of basketball, you think of the Knicks. It's not even a question. So it's really an honor, because in even going back even a little further, when I was growing up, there were no Brooklyn Nets, right, until 2012, right? It was the New York Knicks were the team for New Yorkers, right? And the Nets were the team for New Jersey people. And then the Nets came to Brooklyn, and that created like a little bit of I wouldn't really call it a power struggle because you still have this massive, rabid Knicks fan base. But my brother, for example, he's a diehard Nets fan and has been ever since the Nets moved here. And you have some of those people who have that Brooklyn pride that I do that kind of wanted to rally around the Nets, right? And I respect it. And I kind of love it. Like, I love that my borough has a team that we can call our own. But at the same time, it's an uphill battle, right? You're never going to be more popular than the Knicks. It's kind of like the Clippers with the Lakers. Like, it's just never going to happen. So it's cool seeing this side of it. The energy at MSG is electric every single game. And it's just it's really fun dealing with Knicks fans. Y'all are ridiculous, but in the best possible way.
Well, I'm happy that you have fun with it because I'm sure at times when you were covered in the Nets, you had a lot of us. I gotta bring this up because this is like I still remember this tweet. This is a tweet you put this out. This is from February 2022.
Oh my goodness! How
I always think about this tweet when I think about you. Just so you know, my pops is a lifetime Knicks fan. I asked him if he'd trade Kemba Walker, Alec Burks, and Evan Fournier to the Lakers for Russell Westbrook. And then you quoted him and he said, the Knicks can get rid of them motherfuckers. All 3 of them guys can't give me the effort that Russell Westbrook can give me in one game. And I, among many others, were in the quotes being like, I love your dad. He might need help.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect way to put our relationship. I love my pops. It's not a might. There's no might about it. That man needs to seek professional mental help. He needs help. But love him to death. He'll probably end up seeing. He's a head case, but I love
him. So forgetting the Knicks of 2022, since you started covering the Knicks, they've undergone massive changes on their roster. Obviously, the most significant one just recently with Karl Anthony Towns. I guess before the trade even happens, had you heard anything over the summer indicating like not only were the Knicks interested in that, and they were having serious discussions, or that anything was even close to happening?
No, honestly, I was surprised when it all happened. Obviously, once you saw that the contract extension for Julius didn't come, and then you also saw the haste with which they got the Jalen Brunson deal done, right? Like that deal, you didn't even get 12 hours to go by, and Jalen probably could have signed it earlier that morning. I think he was just taking his time. He wanted to just enjoy his day, and then he signed it later. And then you got weeks and weeks, and then months go by, and there's no extension for Julius. So once you kind of see that, it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen here? And then once you consider the salary cap implications of him potentially being able to leave, and then once you consider what happened with OG, right? OG, you trade all these pieces for OG. He comes and you got to give him $212 million, otherwise he's leaving. They were going to face a similar situation like that next summer if Julius doesn't get a contract extension, and then they don't trade him. So you kind of saw the breadcrumbs there. But did I think that a cat trade was going to get done? Not as soon, but then, there's just so many different factors at play. You have Isaiah leaving, right? And I think that was part of it. And then on top of that, you got Mitch not coming back until December, January. That coupled with the uncertainty as to whether or not Julius A is going to be able to perform in the playoffs, B, if he can stay healthy, C, the fit, right? That's still one thing that we all had, I wouldn't say concerns. We wanted to see how it would look. I don't think there's any questions about the cat fit on offense, right? The cat fit on offense is a so that's a dream. That's what you want. Defensively, I'm sure we'll get into that. But in terms of whether I saw this coming, I figured a trade was going to happen when there was no extension. But to say that I saw this cat trade happening right when it did, I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody expected it at 10:13 p.m. on a Friday night either. So,
right.
We had that going. But obviously, Cat's now there with the team. Julius was here for 5 years, and he had his ups and downs with the fans for sure. And it wasn't always smooth sailing, I'm sure, internally either. But obviously, he was a huge piece of the Knicks turning themselves around into a competent franchise. So he's gone after 5 years. Dante DiVincenzo, I mean, he was only here for 1 year, but it was like, what a year. And obviously, he has the ties with Brunson and Josh Hart and the Villanova thing. So it just feels a bit more integrated as well. I'm sure guys are excited about Cat coming in as well, but do you kind of sense a little bit of, I don't want to say maybe like sadness of or maybe just kind of it feels a little weird without those guys there? Or do you think it's just these guys are pros and it's on to the next thing?
I think what happened was there was a week kind of to process it before Cat got here. Right. And I think that in a way kind of helped with the news, with the reality settling in. Right. Because it's not like trade happens. Dante is going, Cat's right there. And now you kind of got to hit the road. You had 3-4 days of getting used to Julius and Dante not being there and then having to integrate Cat. That being said, I mean, yeah, Dante, we were talking this entire not the entire summer, but since they traded for Mikal, this is supposed to be the Villanova reunion, right? And now you really can't have a reunion without a guy who set the record last year, right? And it's not even just about the 3 points, right? Like Dante kind of brought kind of that toughness. He had that dog in him, right? So you're kind of missing that. And then Julius, I mean, he was such an integral part about what this team was trying to. No, thank you. That's housekeeping, trying to clean my hotel room, which is ridiculous. But with Julius, I mean, you got to think about what he's done for this franchise since he came here, right? You're talking about, and it's been covered at length, the guy who came here when nobody else wanted to come here, right? The guy who kind of brought this franchise back to a place where now it's cool to play in New York again, right? And he shouldered that load himself, and then you get Jalen coming through, and it just, part of you wishes it worked out differently, but at the same time, you can kind of see, play styles. You kind of see the way that this team was trying to play versus Julius's skill set, how they're trying to be a little bit more versatile. So it is a little difficult. It was definitely a shock for some of these guys for sure. But at the end of the day, this team, I think we've seen it all, right? We saw them trade Quentin. We saw them trade Evan Fournier, and they made all these other moves. They traded RJ and Emmanuel quickly, right? Like this team is going to do, this front office is going to do what is necessary, even if it sucks, right? Like sometimes it's not going to be the sweetest thing to do. But they're going to do what they think is going to put them in position to compete with teams like the Celtics and the Sixers and the Bucks, who I think are getting grossly overlooked because I think Giannis is going to be the best player on the floor in any of these games in the Eastern Conference, right? So you got to figure that out. That being said, the Knicks are putting themselves in position to compete for a title, and sometimes it takes moves like that.
So you mentioned about how the Knicks were maybe looking to be a little bit more versatile offensively, and you had also mentioned previously about the significance of them losing Isaiah Hartenstein, free agency. He gets an offer that the Knicks literally had. They could not offer that deal. They couldn't compete with it financially with Oklahoma City. Do you so when you talk about that, I feel like this always goes back to, and I mean, we had talked about this on our podcast, towards the end of last season, where it was kind of look, Julius is great. And what happened in that month of January where the Knicks were just destroying everybody, obviously with Julius, was fantastic. But you kind of saw that shift offensively where it's okay, yes, Brunson is carrying a usage that I think everybody kind of understood was not sustainable. But you
Yeah.
looked at how is he getting the usage? A lot of it was like, he'd pitch it to Isaiah and then he runs around 3 different screens and he comes back and he gets it. So in terms of versatility, you're seeing that. You were seeing more off-ball screening and cutting and all these kind of movement things. Do you think that do you think for the Knicks front office to see that and to they'd never had a sample before while Julius was here of any significance of what does this team look like without Julius Randle? Because he was an Iron Man. He's always healthy and he plays through injuries. He's a tough guy. Seeing that sample, so you get from end of January through obviously the end of the postseason, and you kind of see whatever other issues existed, the offense was really, really, really good.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that was a significant factor in ultimately the decision of the contract is obviously a big piece of it too, but also just knowing that hey, we have some confidence that if we do move on and want to lean into this different direction, we know that this is good. And also now that we lost Hartenstein and the fact that Mitchell Robinson's out until December, January, if we can go get this guy, if we can go get Cat, this kind of helps replace pieces of Julius Randle and Isaiah Hartenstein that really nobody else, not that's even available right now, could potentially offer.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to look at the sample size while he was out, right? And the first one is Julius, and this is a point that I make every time that I speak about Julius. When we're talking about 24 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, the only guys that averaged that kind of stat line last year or better were MVPs, right? We got Embiid, we got Jokic, we got Giannis, and then we got Luka, who will be an MVP at some point soon, right? So that's great company to have. Right. So you can look at it one way, which is, well, without Julius, we made it here. What happens if we bring him back? Right. Can't we be even better bringing a guy of that talent in? But to your point, once you see the way that these guys are playing when Julius is not on the floor, and then you see that you're able to sustain losing him to get the 2nd seed, win 50 games, beat Philly, then go on, and you probably would have beat Indiana if you don't have other players go down in that series. Now you start thinking, okay, well, what can we turn Julius into? Can we continue to play this style of basketball when he comes back? Or can we maybe lean more into this style of basketball by getting somebody else, right? Another guy that I had on my radar for them to try to go get was Lauri Markkanen. If you go get Lauri Markkanen, I think that's a good fit as well, right? So it's interesting. But to your question, I think the salary portion of it was a drastic reality of it, because you got to decide whether or not you're going to give this guy $181 million over 4 years if he's going to take that. And then on top of that, as you also mentioned, losing Isaiah Hartenstein, I think once that happens and then you see Mitch isn't going to be here till December, January, you got to do something, because you can't really start this season behind the 8 ball. And we saw Tibbs talking about putting Julius at the 5 for spurts, but as cool as that sounds offensively, and you're talking about the pace, you're just giving up so much on defense if you do that. So something had to happen. And it's just tough, right? Because part of me wonders what would have happened if you bring Julius back, right? If you run this back and you have Julius. But I also think it's difficult to do that without Mitch, and then also without Isaiah Hartenstein. And then you don't really have any suitable person to step in, because you're looking at Jericho Sims and Precious Achiuwa, which, I mean, we're hoping that they take year-over-year steps. But if we're looking at just them coming back as the same players they were last year, you thrust them into the starting lineup next to guys like that. I don't know if that works, right? So I think it's a combination of factors. I think, to your point, yes, looking at that stretch in the regular season after Julius gets hurt, OG gets hurt, OG comes back, and now you're starting to see this way that they're playing with Isaiah. And I think that gave them confidence of, okay, well, if we move on from Julius, we can still win games. But once you factor in the contract, once you factor in the injuries, and once you factor in just the thought of Cat being available, right, and the Timberwolves, because I don't know if Cat was available, right, up until, we don't know what that situation was, when it became evident that the Timberwolves were trying to move on from him. Him being available, we know that they've wanted him for a long time. Him being available actually right now, I think that's also another factor in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, Shams had reported that the Knicks had made an offer going back to the draft of Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson. The Wolves had no interest in that. So I have suspected since that came out, I was like, so maybe all these reports of the Knicks at least listening in on offers on both those guys was an attempt at them, maybe trying to net assets so that they don't have to then give up DiVincenzo in the deal. But DiVincenzo obviously goes on the deal. I think that's obviously, it's a loss for them, because as you mentioned, he was one of the most prolific 3-point shooters in the league last year. He obviously has a fantastic chemistry with your franchise player and your other key players, so it's a big loss. But you obviously ultimately, I think the idea, and this goes back to kind of the Hartenstein Randall portion of it, is like, if you think Towns can give you a lot of the scoring that Julius obviously brings to the table, but then he also gives you that ability to kind of, hey, our center can come out, screen for the point, our point guard, and now you're really stressing the defense, and obviously with Towns' shooting, that provides a different dynamic that the Knicks haven't had at center since they traded Porzingis, and at that point in time he was a 4.
Exactly.
Like it's a huge thing. So I think that was obviously, and as you obviously this, everybody knows this, the Knicks have had interest in Karl-Anthony Towns for years. So I think once that kind of opportunity came to the fore, they probably just didn't want to have it pass. And I think they tried for as long as they could, right, to just get it done without DiVincenzo. But then once that wasn't going to happen, it's like, hey, we're 2 days out from training camp. What do we want to do here? Do we pull the trigger or do we not? And I think they ultimately just decided, hey, we got to do this. To bring it back to Cat, I mean, Cat, obviously, look, he's been in Minnesota for 9 years and he's been through a lot. I mean, I think I read today, I think he's had like 7 head coaches and 5 general managers, president of basketball operations, like complete crazy stuff. Like it reminds me of the Knicks prior to Leon Rose, actually. But like, you know, he's a 2-time All-NBA guy, 4-time All-Star. I don't want to say he was the franchise player in Minnesota for a little while. Obviously, that torch has been passed to Anthony Edwards and had already been passed to Anthony Edwards. Do you sense like Hat's now here? I'm sure you had a chance to talk to him. Like, do you get the sense of like, yes, Minnesota was a big part of like his career, and he left a really nice note upon, you know, kind of the trade being official. Do you get the sense that he's looking forward to this opportunity, and do you think he like kind of understands that? I mean, look, he was on a contender last year, and that's obviously nothing to take away from that. But like, do you feel like he gets the stage in New York is just like this is just bigger in a lot of ways?
Oh yeah, 100%. Number one, there's the hometown tie. Grew up not too far outside of the city in central Jersey. Played ball, I believe, at St. Joseph. So like, and I asked him about it. I asked him, you know, is like, what was his phone like when the trade went off? And you know, he finds out that he's going home, and he goes, "Hey, my phone is still going off right now." And then he quickly transitions into, you know, his mom, who obviously passed away from COVID in 2020. You know, their side of the family is Dominican, right? And he's got, New York has what, 8% of the population in New York is Dominican, probably more right now. It's close to 1 million Dominicans here. So he feels that type of, I wouldn't call it pressure, right? But he feels like that type of responsibility to being home, to being around his people, to being near family, right? And you're home now, right? We understand. He said to himself, he goes, "This is the Mecca of basketball." He said his mom looked at it as the Mecca, his entire family looks at it as the Mecca. So he's going to show up. Now, in terms of him being excited, number one, he's coming from a situation, as you touched on, where he made it to the Western Conference Finals. I asked him about that, and he said that experience started right now in training camp. And I thought, to be honest, when he said it, he took a little shot at Jimmy Butler. I could be wrong, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. But he said, you know, we can't wait until after the All-Star break to you know, want to put the pedal to the metal and start working. We got to start working right now, you know. So I think that's very, you know, that's mature in terms of just like the approach that you have to have in terms of what it's going to take to win this season. Like, you've got to come in here and you got to go. You got to get it going right now, especially when you're in the middle of a trade and you're learning all these new pieces. That being said, I mean, I think Cat is just as excited as we all are. When you talk about what the potential is for this team offensively, you've got, so I was crunching the numbers a little bit earlier. Josh Hart right now is about the 7th. Thinking about if we're considering Tyler Kolek in the mix, and if Tyler Kolek is able to replicate his 3-point shooting, Josh Hart would be the 8th best 3-point shooter on this team, right? Because you'd have Cat, you'd have Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Shamet, Payne, McBride, and then you could look at Kolek, right? So it could go a bunch of different ways. And like, you're looking at a team right now, and I like to make this comparison often. You're looking at a team that can kind of play like Indiana Pacers style basketball, but almost maybe even better than they play it. The difference between Indiana is that they've just got 10, 11, maybe 12 people that they can slot in. The Knicks don't have that. But in terms of like speed and pace and being able to get up and down and play 5 out, and you got a dynamic guy at the 1 and kind of at the 5 or the 4, how they had with Siakam, that's kind of perfect. That's the way that this team is going to play. And Cat sees that. Everybody sees that. But I think, and the biggest thing about it here was that, like, you know, he didn't necessarily want to put the cart before the horse. Everybody's talking about, oh, well, what do you think it's going to look like with 5 out? What do you think it's going to look like with you playing pick and pop with Jalen? What do you think it's going to look like all these different things. He goes, yo, it's not going to look like anything if we don't sit here and put the work in every day, right? And I took that to mean, okay, this guy is mature. He's more mature than he was, obviously, the last time that Tibbs coached him, because obviously you're going to be like that 5 years later. But this is a guy who's been, molded by his experiences in this league, right? This is a guy who's seen success, who's seen failure. And I think, quite frankly, I think he's maybe a little bit tired of the rhetoric that he's not a winner, right? Like, he's a guy who just wants to go there and, he said it himself, he wants to amplify what this team has already done, right? So I'm excited. I know he's excited. I know he's looking forward to it. But from our brief interaction as part of the media scrum yesterday, this is a guy who sounds a lot like he wants to get to work. And I think this is going to be a really good team, but I'm sure we're going to get into it. The defensive part of rim protection, especially without Mitch, I asked Tibbs about that too. And I wouldn't say it was a non-answer, but he did say it's going to take multiple second and third efforts, right? We can't only rely on Cat, right? And I take that to mean this is going to be an issue for this team this season. So it'll be interesting. The Knicks did some things with it last year. I think you'll be able to put Cat at the 4 for some situations, and maybe you'll be able to have Jericho on the floor or Precious on the floor. And then if Mitch is on the roster by the time he's healthy, that could be a formidable combination of putting him and Cat on the floor at the same time, the same way that the Timberwolves had Rudy and Cat on the floor at the same time. But if we're talking about between now and December, January, or if Mitch isn't on this team by then and you're leaning right on Cat for rim protection, that's tough. But I have to make this point. Do you need rim protection if you can stop people from getting to the paint? Right. So if you've got Mikhail and you've got OG and you've got Deuce and you've got Josh and you've got guys who are going to guard their yard and not get blown by, obviously it's going to happen. Right. It's the NBA and everybody can blow by anybody if you give them long enough. But we're talking about guys who are known to be stopped. Even Landry Shamet, that's a guy that Tibbs has brought up as an underrated defender on this team. If we've got strong point of attack defense, then maybe we won't have to lean so heavily on Cat's rim protection. That being said, that's going to be one of the issues for this team defensively, unless Cat learned so much from watching Rudy that now he can apply some of those things here in New York. If that's the case and Cat is coming out as a dominant rim protector, look out.
Yeah, so the defensive stuff is definitely interesting, and it's definitely the biggest question. I mean, there's stuff offensively they'll have to work out, like just the natural chemistry and figuring out where Cat wants the ball, how does Brunson get it, all that stuff will get. But I think there's a level of confidence we know that they'll figure that out. Defensively, you talked about, Cat obviously has had issues defensively throughout his career. The main one is that he has really, really struggled when he's been asked to play drop coverage. And we know that Tibbs' preference is, at his core, he wants, kind of the founding principle of his defense is my center plays drop. Now, he's been a little bit more flexible with that in New York. He's had his center show up higher, Mitchell Robinson, and especially Isaiah Hartenstein. They play closer up to the level of the screen. And looking back at his stuff at Cat's kind of time in Minnesota, he had his most success defensively when he was asked to, blitz screens, hedge and recover, those type of more aggressive coverages, which Tibbs has been reticent to kind of execute consistently previously, although situationally he has. Obviously, you have OG Anunoby, you have Mikal Bridges on that kind of back line now. You have a little bit more versatility. He talked even before the Cat trade. When you and I and many others were like, Randall at the 5, this could be cool. But he talked a lot about, we have personnel
on that, right? Before the season, before the trade happens, and everybody is selling Randall at the 5. I'm like, oh man, jeez, I'm sorry to cut you. I was just like, wow, is this really what we're doing right now?
all the months I wasted thinking about that.
Right.
But Tibbs talked about, he can switch more now because of these guys he has.
Yeah.
Just him mentioning that is interesting to me. Obviously, that's not the same thing as hedge and recover or blitz or whatever. But do you get the sense that he at least understands, like, okay, and look, I think it's safe to say that they would not have done this deal unless Tibbs was like, go ahead, like I'm fine with making this deal.
Yeah,
I think he understands. He obviously is very familiar with Cat personally. Yes, it was 5 years ago, but he definitely has an understanding of what he is good and not good at defensively. Do you get the sense that he feels like he can and will be a little bit more flexible defensively to cover up for some of Cat's issues, and that he has a better understanding of what he actually what the team kind of needs around Cat to make it all work?
Let me just put this into perspective. I asked Tom Thibodeau what his Thanksgiving plans were, and he told me he was going to be at the practice facility watching film. Right, so like. The idea that there's some sort of defensive scenario that he hasn't thought of or that he hasn't, tried to find a solution for, impossible. I think that any type of scenario that you and I can come up with, he's thought of that scenario. He's thought about the counters. He's thought about everything, right? Tom Thibodeau is someone who eats, sleeps, breathes. The way I inhaled that 6-piece fried chicken, which I'm disgusted with myself for saying how many pieces I ate. That's what Tom Thibodeau does with basketball schemes, concepts, and just he lives in the gym. Right. So whatever it is, number one, to your point, as you said, I don't think he would have. Obviously, he's part of these discussions as to whether or not they're going to have this trade. I don't think if he didn't think that it could work, I don't know if he would have, stamped that decision. But that being said, it's a guy he's coached before. It's a guy that's familiar with him. That apparently they had a quote unquote reported rocky pass that looks like it's red water under the bridge now. And then on top of that, you've got a guy like OG Anunoby, right? And I think OG is going to be the guy who you're leaning on to cover up some of these mishaps. We watched OG play good defense on Joel Embiid in the playoff series, right? There's no one you can't put OG on, maybe except I don't know. It's Tyrese Maxey. That's one guy that you can't put him on. These shifty, fast guards, maybe Garland, those guys. But in terms of guarding up or down, I like OG's chances. So if we're taking OG and then you got Mikal, who I think the jury's still out a little bit on Mikal being a defensive stopper, right? I think he has versatility and length, but in terms of like being able to stop, we need to see that. But Deuce McBride is a guy who can get stops. Josh Hart is a good defender. This team has good, and then Precious is going to have to play a role too. I think we're going to see more dual big lineups than maybe we're thinking, just because you're going to have additional support there. And on top of that, Precious and OG, I wrote a story on it at the end of last season. They had the best net rating in terms of any two-man units for the Knicks last season, and that's just straight defense. I watched Precious shut down DeMar DeRozan in the season finale, right on that game. What it could have been a game-winning possession for the Bulls, he shut that down. So I think Precious is going to have a good year. But in terms of defensive schemes, I mean, we're dealing with a guy who, if Tom Thibodeau could, I think he'd just build a bedroom right there in the practice facility and just sleep there all night, because that's all he does, right? So I think he's envisioned every potential defensive scheme, the counters, the flaws for everything. But at the end of the day, you can't scheme for roster inefficiencies, right? So like you're going to have to there's going to take some trial and error. This is what the preseason is for. You're going to have to see what it looks like. And then once you figure out whether you have to scheme more or whether you need some additional help, this front office is showing you if there's a guy out there that they can go get. And now it's tough because you're looking at the assets. You can't take back any additional money when you're sending stuff out. That's why you're looking at a guy like Mitch. Mitch is making 14.3. You could feasibly trade Mitch and get 2 other guys back, right? You can get some other guys, and now you can kind of plug in some of these holes. But that's also like the other side of that is you can keep Mitch, and now you can have kind of what the Utah was not Utah. I almost said Utah because that's where Rudy was playing. What Minnesota was doing last year with the dual big. So it's interesting. That's what camp is for. That's what preseason is for. I'm happy we're going to get a chance to see it live. But in terms to answer your question, yes, Tom Thibodeau has thought of anything that we can possibly think of, and then 10 times more than that. I promise you.
So to go back a little bit, you mentioned Josh Hart maybe being like the 8th or 9th best shooter on the team. It looks like you had a little chat with him. Here's a quote from him. It's just he's talking about goals that he has for the season.
Yeah,
this was his quote. It's to shoot better than 30% from 3. That's for damn sure. So I'm looking for that number to go up for sure. The attempts will go up too. Obviously, look, Josh Hart is I don't even know how to describe him. He just does things on a basketball court and is running around. I mean, that's basically how he describes himself. But I do think that, when you're talking about playing cat at the 5, so much of the value of that really is having 5 guys that can shoot. And as valuable as Josh Hart is, and I do think there can be value in Josh Hart in those lineups. You can use him as a role man. It doesn't need to just be as a spot up shooter. You can have Cat go spot up, but you want the option of hey, Josh, can you just spot up and shoot a 3? I mean, he's talked about this before, and it is obviously everybody wants to shoot better, but is this a thing that he really kind of dialed in on this offseason, or what was that? Because I know he did hire a shooting coach too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I know for sure that Josh took a lot of time away from the game before he started getting back into the flow of things. Just because you could say he had the abdomen stuff. He played 81 games, played 48 minutes. I think one of the games he played 53 or something stupid like that. Like the mileage on him was ridiculous. But for him, he said it was mostly mental, right? It wasn't necessarily he said last year in terms of his jump shot. Like he might miss one shot or he might miss two shots. And now when you go in for shot number 3, he's trying to adjust his jumper in the middle of the shot. He's thinking about whether or not that's why we started to see the hesitation, right? I asked him about the hesitation in his shot last year, and he said that's something he had to work on too. So, you know, in terms of, are we going to see Josh shoot 50% from 3 this season? I don't know. That's what he shot when he first got here. Those first 25 games, he shot 51.9%. He was on a heater, right? And then now you have this stretch, which is the worst of his career. I think we end up somewhere in the middle. I think the important thing to hear from him, though, is that he's just going to shoot more of them, right? Because you got to let it fly. Teams are going to sag off of you. They're going to let you have it. If everybody else is shooting 40% or better, he's got to be comfortable doing that. But to your point, and I wrote this for the New York Daily News today, it's not like the 3-point shot is Josh's bread and butter. It's not like if he shoots 0 of 5 from 3 that he can't still end up plus 20 in the box score. This is a guy who's going to, I think, in terms of creating second chance opportunities, when you're talking about 5 out and you've got Cat pulling the center out and you got Josh, who's just going to full head of steam run into the paint and try to grab a rebound, there's that. And then you have the transition aspect of it where he's going to grab a rebound, push the ball full length of the floor. And now you got 4 shooters around him. Triple double Josh this is the season for that, right? If we're talking about betting for this year, I think Josh is going to get at least 1 triple double this year, just because you're putting him on the floor with shooters. He's going to be able to get 10 rebounds because Cat's going to pull the big out of the floor. out of the paint. In terms of that 3 ball, though, that's something that he's going to have to work on. That's something I asked him about. He said he's working on it. He said it was mostly mental. So we're going to see if that's the case. I don't know. I would like to see it. I'd like to see him shoot 40% because I think he can get hot. He's a guy who can get hot from 3. And then if he gets I have a sneaky suspicion that if he gets hot to start the season, he might ride that heat wave all through the season, right? So I think it's going to be a situation where we might see him come out shooting a lot. And I think that's also what the preseason is for. I think preseason, we're going to see a lot of Mikal Bridges. We're going to see a lot of Cat, right? Because they have to get into the flow of things. I don't know that we see too much Jalen in terms of just like trying to go for 30 until we get to that preseason finale. I think that preseason finale is going to be the closest that we see to when they play, like what they're going to look like. But sure, I want to see Josh shoot 10 threes in a game during the preseason, right? I want to see where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, so interesting with Josh. Last year, you know, he plays in the the FIBA World Championship, and he talked about it like he was not at 100% to start the year. You've seen him now. Like, do you feel like this is a better start to the year for him on like a physical level, where he feels better about kind of where he's at?
Yeah, I think so. When he spoke to us on Wednesday, he had 2 ice packs saran wrapped in plastic around his knees.
He had the Ewing going on.
Yeah, exactly. And he had joked that, during media day, he had joked with us. I asked him, what his approach was going to be to training camp. I said he's going to go 100% training camp. He just laughed and got up and walked away. So then to see him wearing ice packs around his knees after training camp, I'm like, hey, well, did you go crazy today? And he was like, yeah, I guess I did. So I think he's in a good spot in terms of getting his body prepared for what the rigors of the regular season are going to be, which is good because that's what you need a player like that. You need his body to be ready because he's not a guy who's just going to be out there not throwing his body around. Like he's got to have his body ready for whatever's going to come. That being said, you don't want to put too much mileage on him because you need him to last the entire season and then the playoffs. But this is a guy who, we asked him, or I forget who asked him about it, but asked about the idea of, pacing yourself to avoid injury. And he was basically like, no, I'm just going to pray and go out there and do what I need to do. Right. So we'll see, man. It's going to be a fun season for Josh. Is easily my favorite player on the roster. Right. He's hilarious. He's always eating Mike and Ike's. Always got a joke. Doesn't care what he says or if what he says is offensive to anybody. He's just going to be himself, man. Gotta love him.
It's a beat reporter's dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, actually Josh had a quote when he was like, when everybody else was like tiptoeing around it, and he was just like, I'm just going to talk about it. But he talked about like, yeah, now with Cat, like, we can, he said like, it's just going to be so much space now out there. Yeah. Do you get like the set, like, you've been around these guys now for a few days here for training camp. Do you feel like the sense of excitement and also that these guys are like, wow, we're going to have so much more space now? Like, is that something that they're consciously aware of and looking forward and kind of talking about?
100%. And I can kind of juxtapose that against what I covered in Brooklyn when the Nets were trying to figure out how the hell they were going to win games with Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton on the floor, right? You got 2 guys who can't shoot threes, who can't really score outside of the paint, right? And now you're really handicapping the rest of the offense because guys know that they can't shoot. And you already know that, you know, I hope Ben Simmons comes out doing something this year, but you know that Ben isn't really the guy who's looking to score, right? You've got 5 guys on the floor for the Knicks where anybody can go for 20 on any given night, right? In terms of the starting 5, that's exciting. And then on top of that, you're telling me that Jalen, you're going to be able to break somebody down and there's not going to be a rim protector at the rim, right? So that means someone's going to have to help, and now you get to spray that out to somebody else who's a 40% three-point shooter, or Josh, who could just make a secondary play. Like, it's going to be ridiculous. And then on top of that, you got the pick and pop that you can have with Cat and Jalen. That I can't wait to see that when they unveil that. They'll probably do that some point on Sunday against Charlotte. It's going to be ridiculous because you're going to have, so to your point, the spacing on the floor is just going to allow them to get into these passing lanes to force it. This is what Tibbs off. This is really Tom Thibodeau's dream, right? And this is what I was having this conversation with my editor for a story I'm working on. You know, this is the type of offense that Tom Thibodeau wants. He wants you to get into the paint, force the defense to make a decision, and then move that ball around. The Knicks might shoot 53s a game this year, right? Because you're going to have to, right? They're going to have to, because Jalen is such a smart player. If the defense collapses on him, he's not going to force a shot up. He's going to move that ball. And now everybody else is going to move the ball too. The ball is going to move faster than these players. You're going to get open shots, right? So there's that aspect of it. There's the offensive rebounding aspect of it for guys like Josh, right? Josh is going to be able to just crash the boards. I'm excited, man. And then you got Cat. And the best thing about Cat, I was just digging into his numbers. Only like, I don't want to just be wrong about the percentage, but I'll ballpark it. Maybe less than 10% of his threes came from the corners, right? He's not really a corner 3-point shooter. We're talking about a guy who's shooting from the top of the key or from the wing. Like, the spacing is going to be ridiculous. So I'm really excited. They're really excited, but they're trying to they're not trying to temper expectations. They're trying to temper the excitement because they know that just to get to a place where everything looks good, it's going to take so much work. So there's a lot of work to be done, but yeah, they're excited about that spacing for sure.
Spacing will be very, very key to see. You had mentioned yesterday, so I'm actually curious about this because you got to see TJ Warren for an extended period of time while you were covering.
Oh, yes.
Up close.
Yeah.
So the Knicks have now signed him to an Exhibit 10 contract.
Mm-hmm.
They put up some footage yesterday of him cooking guys one-on-one. We always know that that's in TJ's bag. The bubble TJ Warren is still in there somewhere, hopefully. Like, he's had a rough time with injuries the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Do you think that, you saw him obviously very briefly in practice for whatever it was worth. Do you think like there's still something there with him? Because he's only 31. It's not like he's, 36, 37. Or is this kind of like we're just throwing something out there and seeing if we get lucky? Because I remember a couple of years ago when he was in Brooklyn before the trade. So he gets included in the trade to Phoenix with Kevin Durant. Yeah. I remember watching him in Brooklyn a couple times, and I was like, I think he still has something here. Like, he's not a bad. Like, he can still score the ball. Do you think he still has a chance to kind of maybe play himself in onto the roster, or do you think like, nah, probably not?
It's tough to say just because, from the state of the roster, I'm going to assume Landry Shamet is going to make this roster, right? He's on an exhibit, either 9 or 10 or whatever it is. I'm going to assume he's going to get a roster spot just because of the way that Tibbs has been speaking so highly of him, right? So from there, you've got, actually, let me pull it up right now. You've got a few guys who are competing for, a very limited number of roster spots, right? You got Chuma Okeke in the mix, right? And that's a guy who the Magic kind of sold on, but you don't know where his potential is. He's still a young guy. TJ Warren's in the mix. It's difficult because you're looking at a guy like TJ as a guy who's played in high level, playoff games, who's shouldered loads before. But as you mentioned, he's 31. And also, as you mentioned, he has this lengthy injury history. And these are like significant injuries that kept him off the floor for seasons at a time, right? So, but that's also why it's smart, right? Because you're getting him on a training camp deal, and then even if you sign him, he's going to be on a minimum, right? So, like, I think these are kind of the low, we'll call them low risk, high reward deals. Like, if you give TJ Warren a roster spot and then he gets hurt and now he's done for the season, you're not really sweating it because you gave him a minimum deal and is a flyer anyway. But if he's someone who proves that he can get you just 10 points here or there, right? I got to watch him the other day. Mikal Bridges has a hand in his face. TJ shoots over him, knocks it down. Then Mikal's looking at him like, well, I can't believe you made that. Like, stuff like that. TJ is a tough bucket getter, and there's always room for that. Now, will he crack the roster? Unsure. Defensively, there's always going to be some concerns there, especially when you got a guy who's coming off of foot injuries the way he had, right? But at the same time, you're not giving TJ Warren a training camp deal to put him on defense, right? You're giving TJ Warren a training camp deal to see if he's still get to 20, right? Yeah. And I didn't get to see enough. It's not like I got to watch him for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I saw him for about a minute and a half. But I saw a guy out there who was shooting the ball. I saw a guy out there who was competing in one-on-ones and scoring on guys, right? So will he make the roster? I don't know. This team, I have no clue if he's going to make the roster, right? But if he's healthy, this is a guy who historically we've seen is a microwave, right? And there's always room on a roster for a guy like that. Kind of like, I saw the comparison, people making the comparison to Alec Burks yesterday. I thought it was Alec Burks when I first saw him. I'm looking over there, I'm like, when did the Knicks get out? Is Alec Burks in training camp with the Knicks, even though he's on a different team? How is that? I was really confused, and I took out my camera and I zoomed in. I was like, oh, that's TJ Warren. Okay. So like TJ can kind of maybe be that kind of microwave guy. But at the same time, a guy with his injury history, a guy at his age, a guy of his, of just what he's been through, you don't really want to put too many eggs in that basket. So could he make the roster? Sure. Will he make the roster? I don't know. But if he's a guy that can stay healthy and is showing you in camp that he can still get 15, I don't see why not. It's not like you're going to be leaning on him for 20, 30 minutes a night. You might only need him for 3 games out of the year. And maybe in those 3 games, one of them he gets you 20, right? So who knows?
That would be the perfect replacement for Alec Burks then. So you mentioned health and eggs in a basket. Well, somebody who we know is durable and who the Knicks definitely have a lot of eggs in his basket is Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges, you got a chance to cover him for a bit while he was in Brooklyn. Yeah. Obviously, last year was kind of like just a terrible year for him. Not necessarily statistically, but I think you could sense it when you watched him play. It almost felt like
he's miserable. He was a miserable person last year. And I blame Josh Hart for that. Josh Hart made his life a living hell every time he could. Anytime we put a microphone in front of him, Josh Hart just hammered Mikal Bridges. So crazy.
But he played like somebody who like kind of had lost his spirit on the floor a bit last year. And obviously, I'm sure this trade kind of was very exciting for him. When you're watching him now, like, and is this like, does he look like, oh, okay, this guy is really excited to get back out on the floor? Because I do think like he does have a point to prove, because, when he gets traded to Brooklyn, he was kind of viewed at the time as the, the kind of ideal of a 3-and-D wing in the league. He initially kind of goes off in Brooklyn and people are like, oh my God, is this like a star that they have found? Yeah. Then last year he just, look, they did not have a good situation around him, and he clearly just struggled to be that number 1 type option. Do you get the sense that not only is he excited about this opportunity, obviously, to play next to Jalen Brunson, play next to Josh Hart again, and also to avoid Josh Hart just, kicking him while he's down, but also like just kind of like to kind of put his name back out there again, where it's like, hey, no, like you had me right the first time. Like, this is what I am. This is what I can bring to the table. And obviously an opportunity now with, honestly, I know he's been was on an NBA Finals team, but I think this is the most talented team that he's been on in his career.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't necessarily want to call it a raw deal for him getting traded for KD, right? Like, he ends up in a situation where now you're putting all this pressure on his shoulders. And at first, and I think what happened there, and I was covering the Nets when it happened, so I got a chance to kind of watch it. There was no scouting report as first option Mikal Bridges when he got to Brooklyn, right? It was just, okay, well, let's just see where it goes. He ends up cooking, right? And then that second year, last year, people know, okay, well, you don't really have Ben Simmons. You have this team. Mikal is the first option. And he's been quite transparent about it. That's just not who he is, right? He's not the number 1 guy on a good team. He is maybe one of the best number 3 or number 4 guys that you can have on a talented, maybe championship caliber team, as we saw in Phoenix. So this is way, way, way more up his wheelhouse. And on top of that, he had a chance to expand his game in Brooklyn, having that offensive responsibility on his shoulder. And that only helps him here, because now we can help take some of that pressure off of Jalen and Cat, right? So you got a guy who had to have the ball in his hands more. So now you can put him in situations where maybe you have Jalen on the bench and you're initiating offense through Mikal, right? And then on top of that, he had situations where he was making clutch plays down the stretch. Now you don't have to only rely on Jalen. You don't have to only rely on Cat. You can put the ball, if they double either of them, I'm okay with Mikal getting the game-winning shot if he has an advantageous matchup one-on-one with the game on the line. Yeah, he had opportunities to do that in Brooklyn. That can work, right? So I think part of it was Sure. Yes, I think there's no question. Last season was a disappointment statistically in terms of points per game for Mikal and just the vibe, right? It was bad vibes in Brooklyn, right? And I asked him about it on media day. He said it himself. He could have handled that better in terms of losing, but losing wears on everybody differently. And that was really his first time talking about when he was in Phoenix. They were competing for a little while. Then you come to Brooklyn. They thought they were going to compete when he first got there, and then things just fall off a cliff. I'd be mad too. I'd be depressed too if I thought I was going to turn things around on a team and now they're 32-50, right? So, that's the past though. Now we're looking here. I think the fit is perfect. I asked everybody about Mikal, what makes him fit? How is he? Why is he so able to? I don't know what the word is. Maybe it's malleable. How is he able to just fit in terms of he was a good fit in Phoenix. He was a good fit in Brooklyn. He was a good fit here. Everyone says the same thing, man. He just wants to do what it takes to win. He's a guy who doesn't have a big ego. He's selfless. And his game is the same way. He's comfortable spotting up, but he's also comfortable stepping up, right? And I think he's a really good fit. Now, in terms of defensively, right, we're gonna have to see. But he's got the tools, he's got the length, he's got the willpower, right? He wants to compete. So I think it's a perfect fit. I can't wait to see it all. I think the combination of him and OG and their length, and then you throw Precious in that mix too. That's going to be a really dangerous defensive combo or trio when they're all on the floor. So I'm excited for that. Offensively, I think, as I mentioned, just a guy that's going to be able to take the pressure off of all these guys, but he's also just like, there's no ego here, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. He's not a guy where you have to give him 15 shots a night, right? He's coming. If Mikal only takes 7 shots and the Knicks win by 15, he's the happiest guy on the team, So yeah, I think it's a perfect fit.
You mentioned Precious. You've also mentioned Landry Shamet and Cameron Payne. Those three, along with Deuce McBride, feels like that's going to be the 4 guys off the bench, at least to start the year, likely to be in the rotation. I mean, would you say that, do you think the Knicks are comfortable with that? Because, look, the depth of this team has been, over the last couple of years, has kind of been what they rode in a lot of ways. And now you've got your starting lineup is, it's fantastic. It's going to be probably one of the best starting lineups in the league. Your bench now is kind of like you're looking for values in the bargain bin here. I actually think the Cameron Payne, once they made the trade for Cat, I was like, now I think I get why they got Cam Payne. Because you need to replace a guard, but I think Cam Payne will be pretty good for them. And I think actually him and Deuce McBride together is an interesting combination off the bench, because Deuce, we know, fantastic shooter, hard-nosed defender, struggled at times, or not even at times. He struggled when he was called upon to be like, hey, you're the point guard on the floor right now, run the offense. Cam Payne, for whatever his flaws are in terms of finishing inside the paint and defensively and blah, 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 he can run an offense. And this is a guy the Knicks have actually had kind of some basic interest in for a little while. And I know they've had interest in him in the past. So I kind of am interested in that combination. I'm a little worried about if Shamet plays with them. That seems pretty small, 1 to 3. But do you think that's kind of where that's headed? Where those 4 guys are the main guys off the bench here?
So the 4 we're talking about are Deuce, Cam Payne, Precious,
and Precious.
And to start the season, at least those are going to be the 4, and then provided Mitch is still on this team, which we don't know. That I think the initial premise of your question was, is this bench going to be sustainable, right? And obviously we asked Tom Thibodeau about that. He says, oh yeah, I like our bench. I think our bench is strong. And then he just talks about, how Landry can come in. I think, based on what Thomas said, the Knicks are pretty high on Landry, the fact that they were able to get him on a minimum deal. This is a guy who's played on several contenders, right? I think he came into the league playing on he's playing in Philly, then he went to the Clippers, then he went to Phoenix, then he went to Brooklyn, then Phoenix, and now he's here, right? Well, I think last year he was on the Wizards, and that's why his numbers kind of tanked, because I'd be depressed. My numbers probably tanked too if I was on a bad team like that, right? So it'd be like that. But from Tibbs' point of view, you're looking at guys like Deuce and Landry in terms of defensive pressure on the ball. You're looking at Precious as a versatile defender and a guy who can get rebounds. And then you're looking at Cam Payne, as we noted, as a guy who can run the floor. One person we haven't talked about is Tyler Kolek. I think he's a dark horse to actually get some minutes this year. Whether we see him on the floor in important games, probably not, right? We know how Tibbs can be with some of the younger guys. But this is a guy, I was just watching him shoot around the other day. Lights out. He wasn't missing. I was like, okay. And then we watched him orchestrate an offense and run an offense. I think we're going to see some 3-guard lineups at times this year. I kind of want to see it, right? let's put Josh Hart at the 5 and get wild. You know what I'm saying? Let's see what happens. So it'll be interesting. But in terms of where this team is in terms of its depth, I think Indiana is the standard there, right? If you're telling me that Indiana can go 12 deep right now, and your team goes 7, it's tough, right? But at the same time, you got a better starting 5. Tibbs said one of the things he's going to do is more than likely keep one of the starters on the floor at all times, which you're going to have to do, probably 2, right? So you're talking about either if we're having those guards on the floor, you're probably going to have Cat or somebody on the floor, maybe Cat and OG, or maybe Mikhail and Cat or something like that. If I was a betting man, I would say that the Knicks do get somebody else this season, right? Because it's the elephant in the room right now, right? You have this stacked starting 5, but once you start going to players 6, 7, 8, and 9, and that's no shade to the guys that are on the roster, but and this is the other way it goes, maybe these guys take another leap, right? Maybe we watch a leap from Deuce, right? Deuce took a tremendous leap last year. Maybe he takes another step forward this year. Precious is a guy who's here basically on a deal where if he doesn't prove himself by December 15th, he could be on the first plane out of here, right? He's got to show something. Jericho is a guy that we haven't even mentioned. Jericho got the start when Mitch first went down last year. And if he didn't turn his ankle on a jump ball, which was wicked, if he didn't turn his ankle on that jump ball, he might have never gave up that starting role. And maybe Isaiah Hartenstein's still here, right? So it's crazy the way some of these things shake out. But in terms of depth on the bench, I think that is an area of concern, as is, potentially rim protection. When I look at this roster, those are the 2 things that I'm looking at. Can you protect the rim and players 8, 9, and 10 on this roster, right? We already spoke about the top 7, top 8, right? After that, it looks a little shaky. But, Tibbs is seeing what these guys are putting in behind the scenes when we're not able to see. So maybe he's seeing some things that show him otherwise. But at the same time, he was just touting Julius Randle as playing the 5, and now Randle's not here anymore. So you never know what these teams have in store.
Tyler Kolek is obviously look, the Knicks are now short on young drafted players. Tyler Kolek is one. Have you gotten a sense at all on what, like, Pacome Dadier? Obviously, they pick him in the first round. They could take him at 25 overall. I think obviously the plan has always been for him to spend a long time in Westchester this year. But have you gotten any glimpses of him during training camp? And if so, like, what have you seen from him? And what have the coaches said about him, if they said anything?
No, coaches haven't mentioned him. Tibbs hasn't mentioned him once, I don't think, since we've been talking to him media day. That being said, no, we haven't asked him about him, so that's probably why he hasn't spoken about him. But I mean, if I'm just going to be frank, we saw what we saw in summer league, right? That was a guy who was struggling to adapt to this type of competition.
He's wrong.
I think to your point, it was tough to watch. I think to your point, we knew just based on roster construction that he wasn't going to get no burn this year, right? Like, it's not a knock on him. You're taking a guy who's so young, who's coming from overseas, and now he's got to figure out the game and figure out everything that goes into playing at this level. I'm more concerned about him maybe 2-3 years down the line. Maybe he can crack the rotation then. In terms of Tyler Kolek, that's a guy who's seasoned at Marquette. We saw what he was able to do in summer league. I mean, that guy was sensational in summer league, right? So I think he's going to make a case for some minutes. But at the end of the day, you're not putting Jalen Brunson at the 2, right? And you're not putting Tyler Kolek at the 2. Jalen Brunson's going to play 35 minutes a night, right? And those other 13 minutes, I don't think Tibbs is going to trust a rookie to keep the team afloat for those minutes. I could be wrong. Maybe opening night, we see some Tyler Kolek minutes off the bench. I just don't see that. I think the backup one we're looking at, as you mentioned, Campaign, Josh Hart, we might see some of the one. Mikal Bridges, I think some of the one as well. That's one of the things that I'm really fascinated with. That's a story that I'm working on that'll come out on Monday, on Sunday before the game. The different lineups and the versatility and the optionality that we have with a bunch of these lineups, man. You could have Josh Hart at the 5, you could play OG at the 5, you could play Cat at the 5, you could play Precious with the 5, you could play Precious and Cat together, you could play Jericho and Cat together, you could play 3 guards, 2 guards, you could have no guards, you could go small, big. There's so many different ways you can play. And I think that's what this preseason is for. That's what training camp is for. And that's something that Tibbs had mentioned that I was pretty interested in. He said because Cat couldn't practice with this team, the Knicks were forced to kind of look at some of the lineups that they would have gotten to at the end of training camp earlier, right? So they got to see Jericho play with the ones, Precious. They got to see all these different combinations. I'm excited to see what these combinations look like through these preseason games. But at the end of the day, you got the Boston Celtics on day one, and they're going to watch them get their championship rings. And then you're going to see a loaded Celtics team and a loaded Knicks team go toe-to-toe. Man, that's going to be a fun game. I'm going to be right there to cover it.
There you go. Precious is pretty interesting to me. Like, he basically got a 1-year prove-it deal. This is kind of beneficial for both.
1 year. He got a 3-month prove-it deal because by 15, if he ain't prove it, that no trade clause, he's up out of here.
But his, I mean, it's kind of beneficial both for him and the Knicks. The Knicks obviously makes sense for them to not commit to Precious long term, and for him, like he has a chance to play himself into a lot of money. I've gotten the sense that since he's come over in the trade, it feels like Tibbs seems to really like him. He seems to like his tools. Do you? I mean, I don't know. I'm sure maybe you've seen some of us on Knicks Twitter. We have our theory of like Tibbs is the big whisperer, given his success with many bigs in his career. But do you feel like? I mean, Precious dropped a quote a couple of days ago where he talked about like we think we have so many guys that so many good defensive players, like we can be one of the best defensive teams in the league.
Yeah.
Last year he talked about like he's like I view myself as one of the best defenders in the league. Do you think like there's a chance that this is a guy that takes a leap for them? And also like you mentioned playing him and Cat together, is that something that you feel like Tibbs is interested in kind of taking a look at some point?
Absolutely. I'm trying to find the exact quote. Oh yeah, defensively, I think we can become a monster. Yeah. That's a quote that I actually asked him that question, which is funny enough. I just forgot to tweet it out. I do think that's something that Tibbs has kind of been talking about this entire going back to last season in terms of Precious and his versatility defensively, being able to play him at the 4 and at the 5. We asked Precious if he was a 4 or a 5, and he was like, man, at this point with Cat here, I'm whatever you guys need me to be, right? So it's interesting. I think what we saw from Precious last year, it will stick with me forever. The way he defended DeMar DeRozan with the game on the line, and the way his chemistry with OG Anunoby and how they're able to switch without even really needing to communicate because they played for so long in Toronto. You can't really put a price on that, right? And that's really good. Now, on the other side, offensively, sometimes he can be a deer in the headlights. Let's call it what it is, right? You give him the ball. But at the same time, last year, guys were just being asked to do so much more than they needed to, than they were comfortable because so many guys were hurt. Precious's wheelhouse is switching defensively, grabbing rebounds, occasionally shooting a 3. But he's a guy that's going to set screens, roll to the rim, try to finish the basket. If he can stay within his game offensively, I think defensively he has an opportunity to really shine here, right? And in terms of when you talk about guys his size who have that skill set defensively, right? We're talking about Jaren Jackson, we're talking about Bam Adebayo, we're talking about guys that can guard multiple positions, that can switch out onto guards, that can guard any big that you throw at them, and that are just versatile and quick. I like Precious on defense. It's really just a matter of is his skill set what this team needs in terms of like, are you going to have to make another trade? And if you are you going to trade him or Mitch? Like it really just boils down to what your trade chips are, right? Because I don't know that you can find another Precious defensively right now, right? And be able to get him with the assets that you have, just because he's so unique on that end of the floor, especially at the 4 where he's able to guard down or upper position. He's really able to guard 2s. I don't know about 1s, but he can guard 2 through 5. I like that a lot. Tibbs likes that a lot. So yeah, I do expect to see him on the floor with Cat. I expect to see him on the floor with OG a lot. I expect to see him on the floor with Jericho a lot too, because I think that's what's going to come off the bench. You're going to get Precious and Jericho off the bench, kind of like with Team USA, how you would see AD and Bam on the floor together, right? And obviously 2 totally different caliber of players, but that's kind of what it's going to look like, having those 2 come off the bench together as a unit. I like that a lot. But in terms of just offensively, that we're going to have to see what that looks like as well. But defensively, Precious, yeah, I think he's been underrated. But I also think he has a good understanding of his game and what he brings. I'm excited to see him at the 4 this year and maybe playing some 5. We'll see what's up.
Is OG as talkative as he's always been?
Oh man, that's a great question. No. Well, I guess yes, right? He's just as talkative as ever, which is minimal. That guy is straight to the point. Gotta love OG. At the end of the day, he's business, right? He's going to come out there. And do you really, it's almost like, the situation with the front office. Do you really need to talk that much if you have the results on the floor? Not really, right? If OG is going to go out there and be OG and be a 40% 3-point shooter or whatever he shot last year, 37, 38, and then also just be a neutralizer on defense, he don't got to say a word, right? That being said, I have some fun ideas that I'm going to run by him for a couple of stories this year that I think he'll be I heard that the one surefire way to get him talking is to talk about his scarf collection. Apparently he's a scarf guy. So
he did a big thing with like Ibaka, right? I think he was on an Ibaka show. Did a whole thing about
yeah. So we'll have to definitely touch on that as well.
Yeah, you got to talk to these guys that are like they don't like bagels. I think like OG doesn't eat bagels. Pacom said he doesn't eat bagels. You got to.
I'm not a bagel guy. I told you, I just cut 60 pounds. Bagels are not in my. I'm talking about I cut 60 pounds, but I just downed a vat of fried chicken right now. Terrible. But nah, bagels aren't in my wheelhouse either, man. It's just because they should have had something about pizza on there. I'm more of a pizza guy than a bagel guy. I don't blame them.
Do you like so OG last year? Obviously, we have Julius, so he plays a lot of the 3 initially. Then he has to play the 4 full time when he comes back. Do you think like do you know if or do you have the sense that Tom Thibodeau has any preference there? And honestly, do you think OG has any preference there? Because, and I'm asking this only because we know that OG, great player when he's healthy, does not like he's had a lot of injuries in his career. Do you think there's any kind of credence like, hey, maybe you don't want to play him exclusively at the 4 because you'll a little bit more wear and tear there, or do you think it's more about, hey, if we're going to play him at the 3, we want to use him at the 3 because this lineup, with Cat and Cat and Precious or whatever, or do you think that health part of it is part of the decision making as well?
No, I think that it's going to be matchup based a lot, and I think we're going to see a lot of players playing one position on defense and another position on offense, right? So it'll be fun to watch. For example, right, like say opening night you're dealing with Boston. Jason Tatum's at the 4. Who you think's playing the 4 that day? It's going to be OG, right? No question about it, right? So, but also, right, you run into a guy like Giannis at the 4, and now you're telling OG he's got to guard Giannis. That's a tough matchup, but that's what you're paying him $212.5 million for anyway, right? You got to go shoulder the crazier lows. Like, think about this: he's going to have to guard Julius at the 4, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of different matchups where you're thinking, that might not be the best for him, but at the end of the day, these guys are basketball players, right? So I think it's going to be fun. I think we're seeing now even really like guys at the 4. The 4 doesn't really look the way it looked 10, 15 years ago, right? Like, and that's part of the reason why you can also make this Julius Randle trade, because 4s aren't built like Julius anymore, right? 4s are guys who can. 4s are kind of 3s that are a little bit bigger now. I think in LA you got Derrick Jones Jr. playing the 4, right? Like, it's crazy. I think in Dallas you got PJ Washington playing the 4, right? Like, the 4 is such a completely different position now than it was in the past. But to your point,
Josh Hart played a 4 last year for us.
Yeah, Josh Hart just plays every position, man. I want to see him play the 5 this year. That'll be fun. But no, to your point, I think we're going to see people defending one position and playing another on the other side of the floor. And I think at the end of the day, these guys know they're playing 5 out anyway on offense, right? So you're going to have all that space to go to work. Defensively, it's just going to be, all right, who are you matching up with? And on top of that, this team is so versatile, they're going to end up switching 2, 3, and 4 anyway, right? Because you're going to have probably Josh, Mikhail, and OG. You might have Precious on the floor too. So you guys are just going to switch. And it's. I think they're going to be fun. Whatever defensive concepts they're cooking up right now, I think they're tailored to their team's strengths.
Just a couple other things before kind of wrap up. Jalen Brunson obviously signs his extension, his max extension, that we all know is a discount extension in a lot of ways. As much as $156 million can be a discount anyway. Nice, right. But this is so. Look, he comes from Dallas. Obviously, when he was in Dallas, he's kind of first of all, he was like the bench guard. Then he moves into the starting lineup, and he's kind of the number 2 to Luka. Comes to New York. It was, it was Julius's team, but I always felt like once Brunson got here, it kind of was like, this is Brunson's team. And now it unequivocally is Brunson's team. Even Cat went out of his way to kind of stress that with the media. It was his first media availability. I do think Brunson, I'm sure he's very aware of like how that's or how he is perceived in that sense. But with this roster specifically, like, he's never had this type of shooting around him. He's never had the floor spread like this before. I think, obviously the first thing you think of is like, oh my God, how is anybody going to defend him? But you mentioned it earlier, like with the floor spread so much, he drives in, defense has to collapse, he can spray out. I don't know. My take has been like, the scoring will be whatever the scoring is, but I kind of think like if he has a great year, and honestly, look, he'll probably get some MVP buzz, and he definitely deserved it last year. The Knicks have the type of season they're hoping to have. He's going to be in the mix this year. I kind of think if there's a chance for him to win MVP, it will be because he has a career playmaking season, and this roster is keenly kind of built for him to have that opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's a couple criteria that Jalen would have to be fulfilled for Jalen to win MVP. Number one, Knicks got to win more than 50 games this year, right? Probably 55.
Maybe.
Yeah, number one, you can make an argument if he has a special enough season, number 2 seed, you get maybe Boston wins 65 games this year and the Knicks win 59 or something like that. But Jalen's averaging numbers that are off the charts, right? So that's one. Number 2, the crunch time, right? Like what we saw Jalen do in crunch time last year, if he's able to carry that over year, I mean, that guy's special in terms of game on the line. I don't know how many more players last year I would have wanted to take a game-winning shot than Jalen. I mean, DeMar had some moments last year. There were actually. Let me not sell all the guys. There's a lot of guys that have come up.
Don't tell Iman Shumpert
that. Oh man, gotta love Iman. But no, to your point, for Jalen to get MVP this year, I think it's going to be tough. I mean, listen, my dark horse MVP this year is Jason Tatum. I think after everything that he had to deal with in the Olympics, we're going to get DNP Tatum. Right, and that version of Jason Tatum might average 35 this year. Right, this is a guy who's we all watched the public humiliation of him in the Olympics. Right, this is a guy who's got a chip on his shoulder. Right, and then you've got a bunch of other guys who don't have as much help as Jalen has, so they're going to have to shoulder more of a responsibility, and that tends to get MVP consideration. That being said, I mean the leadership that he shows. I don't think Jalen even cares about awards. Right, he just cares about the win-loss column. I think there is a chance for him to win MVP if the Knicks are playing at a number 1 seed level. That being said, he's just got so much help around him that the numbers might I find it hard to believe he's going to average. What did he average last year? 27.9, 28.9, something like that. I find it really difficult to believe he's going to be able to average that with more help this year. Right. So maybe it
has to be the assist. It has to be the assist that go up that.
Yeah, it could be the assist, right? You got all this help around you. Right, but we're going to see the hockey assists, right? We're going to see he might get a couple to Cat here, a couple there, but we're going to see him, make the defense collapse, swing, and then swing, and then he's got another point there. So it'll be interesting, but MVP, it's just hard for me to see it. But if the Knicks win enough games, the best player on the number 1 seed is always going to be considered for MVP, right? So I think that is his focus, is making the Knicks as good as they can be, and then if that goes according to plan, everything else will fall in place.
So obviously the Knicks have been consolidated as much talent as they have, much thinner roster. Deuce McBride, I think to some people's surprise, has survived this. He looks like, he obviously had a really nice season last year, especially after the trade that saw Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett go out the door. He gets a lot more minutes. He had some really great games for them in the playoffs, especially against Philly. Do you feel like now he has a established kind of stature on the team? And do you see him not just getting more minutes, because I think now with Dante out, he's definitely going to get more minutes than we were thinking. But do you think like he's going to have an opportunity here to maybe flash more, show more, have a little bit more freedom from Tibbs than maybe he had in the past?
To your point, he's going to have no choice but to, right? This team, after giving up Dante, you're looking for that scoring punch, and sure, it's going to come from campaign, but because Deuce can give you so much on the defensive end as well, he's going to be on the floor. He's going to put himself in positions to score, right? And there was a point last year where, like, whatever Deuce put the ball up, I thought it was going in, right? It doesn't matter how crazy the shot looked. It didn't matter how far away from the three-point line is. I thought everything that he was shooting up was going through the net. And we asked him a little bit about what he was working on the offseason. Some of these guys will be uber specific about what they're working on. A guy like Deuce is like, man, I'm just trying to become a more well-rounded basketball player altogether. He's like, I was talking about Aiden in particular. I think this is a guy who, like, can go out there and – are you looking at him as a 6th man of the year candidate? I'm not really sure. But, like, for this Knicks team, he's going to be their 6th man, right? And he's going to have to step up and make some big shots. But we saw that last year. And then on top of that, to what you were saying, I think the confidence that you have to have after a team that's reorganized the roster so much, committed to you by not trading you, like, you got to feel like you're that guy right now. So if I'm Deuce, I'm coming in with all the confidence in the world. And I just came off of a season where I shot 40% from 3, just paid a kid's college tuition at WVU by hitting the shot. He was talking about that it was a deep shot. He said it wasn't exact from the camera angle.
Yeah, he said it was between the 3.5 court, right?
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was deep. I thought it was further than that, but he said he just hit it, and they gave him 3 strides, so that was good. But I think Deuce is in position for maybe a breakout year, considering last year was kind of his breakout year, but maybe building on that just because he's going to get more opportunity now, right? But I mean, he got a lot of opportunity last year too because he had to fill in. He was starting sometime too. I think now he's going to have rotation and role clarity, right? Because there was so much fluctuation last year, and that's just even better for a young player who's trying to hit his rhythm. So I like Deuce coming off the bench. I know some people were talking about, oh, we might see Deuce McBride starting. I don't know that that's the case, right? If Josh Hart is coming off the bench, I'd be a little bit surprised, but we'll find out. I don't know.
Well, one thing we know, no matter what Josh Hart's role is, he will find a way to complain about it in a very joking manner.
100%.
I am curious, though. Look, obviously the Knicks have lost a lot of players. Of the players that have gone, so we'll talk about the major ones, obviously, like RJ Barrett, quickly, Isaiah Hartenstein, Julius, Dante. Who was your favorite among that group to cover?
Well, I woke up one morning not too long ago and I was blocked by Julius Randle on Twitter. I didn't know how that happened. So
Don't worry, he has me blocked too.
Yeah. Okay. So it's just part of it. It's just doing business with him. Emmanuel quickly was just a joy to be around. Everywhere he went, he was just smiling all over the place. He was so dope. Isaiah Hartenstein was probably my favorite because I got to cover him for the entire year last year. Right. Quickly was gone and RJ was gone midway through. I'm trying to think who else was on this list. Who else? Dante was cool too. I think out of all of them, Isaiah Hartenstein was probably my favorite, just to deal with on an everyday basis. Because remember, Julius was gone for after January 27th, right? We didn't really get to see from him or hear from him again. After I saw him, after that, the next time I saw him was at the event that was at the Earl Monroe event. That was the next time I saw him after he got hurt. So it's pretty difficult to build a relationship with a guy who wasn't around. But Isaiah was just like, in terms of just being around and being accessible pre-game, every game. If I wanted to talk to him for a story, he's there. Post-game, he'll wait around. Just a great guy. And you could tell how much he meant to this team and how much he loved being here by like how he spoke about being here when he was in OKC. He didn't really want to leave, right? It was just, you're talking about 4 years 75 versus 3 years 89 or whatever, or 3 years 87. Like the money, it just you can't say no to it, right? But he was beloved by everybody in terms of the beat and fans. And I'd say out of all those guys, him and Emmanuel Quickly, right? Quickly was just a joy. Like his spirit. I actually there was a funny moment. What was it? Oh man, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I feel like they were asking people whether or not we wanted to wait for Emmanuel Quickly to talk after a game. And I was like, I don't know. I feel like I'm quickly leaving right now. And I was walking out, and he heard that, and he goes, "Oh, you got jokes right now, huh?" So it was fun. He's a good dude, man. But out of all of them, I'd say iHeart for sure. He's cool people.
So Tibbs, he has like a reputation, obviously, as like a very hard-nosed coach and everything. I have heard like our story, or people that have covered him though have always generally been like, no, he's actually great to like talk to. Were you? Yeah. What were you expecting when you moved to the next beat? And then like, was Tibbs, I mean, has he been like a lot, has he lived up to what you expected, or is he just extremely different from what you expected?
It's a little bit of both, right? Like it's kind of like, you know, dealing with anybody. They have a hard exterior at first, then you get to know them and you start to learn how to talk to them. You know, they had an event for Jalen Brunson at Brooks Brothers not too long ago during the summer, and everybody came through, and Tibbs was there too. First of all, you had a line of people at Brooks Brothers for a Jalen Brunson event trying to get Tibbs' autograph, take pictures with him. He was like a celebrity there. But then me and him got to chop it up a little bit, and we were talking, cracking a little bit of jokes. Like, he's a good dude, you know what I'm saying? And you know, the biggest thing about him, which is, you know, which anyone who's ever worked with him can say, you know, he is about basketball and basketball only. To where it's like I told you, Thanksgiving, I asked him what he was doing. He goes, I'm gonna be right here at the facility eating whatever they got for us, right? So yeah, it is. And I think, you know, James is probably going through that right now too. James Edwards, who's coming over from the Pistons beat, he's dealing with Tibbs after dealing with all the people that he was dealing with over there in terms of Monty Williams and Dwayne Casey and all that. It's a completely different change of pace, but you know, it's just like anybody else. They start to warm up to you after they get to know you a little bit, and you got to learn how to talk to them and learn their cadences a little bit. I think I'm in a good spot with Tibbs now.
Yeah, Tibbs his post games have gotten funnier over the last year.
Yeah, I think it's just like, you know, after if you lose a game, you're going to be in a bad mood. If you win a game, you're going to be in a good mood. And if you got stuff going on outside of the game, and you know you're bringing that stuff into the game with you, then you're going to be beholden to whatever mood you were in before you got there. So yeah, it happens.
So you did cover. Were you were on the Nets beat while Atkinson was still there, right?
Yeah. So I wasn't on yeah, Kenny was there for the first year of the KD Kyrie era. And then they canned him midway through that because they knew that he wasn't going to be the coach there.
So are you? I mean, one, are you like? I thought it was a weird deal when he got canned. We all kind of knew what that was about.
Yeah.
Are you like pretty excited? Like, one, are you like happy for him, obviously, that he got this opportunity? And two, like, are you kind of optimistic because the group that he's coaching now is very different from the Brooklyn teams that he initially was kind of entrusted with. Are you are you optimistic about what he can do with this group? Because obviously the goal for them is very different from what the goal was when he first took over in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah. Listen, number one, offensive mastermind. Kenny's one of the smartest guys around. Number two, just when you talk about development guru, I can't wait to see what he does with Evan Mobley, right? I don't necessarily think the Knicks should be like. I think the Cavs are a team that are a trade away, right? They have to address that 3 spot, right? You got Garland, you got Spider, you got Evan Mobley, you got Jared Allen. That 3 spot is questionable. I think they should go get a guy like Cam Johnson from the Nets. If they go get Cam Johnson, that's a little compelling there. But just in terms of like offensive scheming, in terms of like bringing the best out of players, helping players expand their game, I think he's going to be a guy, and he's already got a relationship with 2 guys on the roster, Karis LeVert and Jared Allen, right? So I think the Cavs are a sneaky. See, this is the thing about the East, man, and Tibbs says this every single time. Sure, you got Boston, you got the Knicks, you got Philly, you got Milwaukee, and those are your top 4. Indiana's in the mix. You can't ever discount Miami. You know what I'm saying? Miami is a team where as soon as you think they're asleep, they're over there rolling through the conference, and now they're an 8 seed that's trying to make a run at the title. Orlando got better. Cleveland got better, right? These teams, the East is kind of stacked out of nowhere, right? And Kenny's kind of smack in the middle of that. So I'm excited. Kenny's a great guy. When I first got into journalism, when I first got my job with SB Nation, feels like a lifetime ago, Summer League, I got like 12 minutes with Kenny Atkinson alone. We were just chopping it up, talking about basketball, had an interview with him. After that interview, he goes, yo, man, that was a really good interview. You did a really good job. I was like, thank you. And it was just good to kind of build that rapport with him. So it'll be nice to see him again so many years later. But to your question, yeah, I think he makes the Cavaliers a significantly better team. But as we talked about with Tibbs, you can't scheme for really roster shortcomings. They need to figure out that 3 spot.
Yeah. Jared Allen, was he a good hang?
Oh yeah, Jared Allen's good people. I have a photo with him somewhere of just me interviewing him one-on-one too. He's a good dude. I was talking to him right before I knew he was gonna get paid. I knew at some point I was like, man, you know you're about to get the bag, right? He was like, yeah, man. I'll try not to get too excited, but I know. And he cashed out 5 years, 180 million. It's a lot of money, man. So I still don't know what happens there because it kind of feels a little bit redundant a bit. You probably want to end up putting Evan Mobley at the 5, but he's got to get bigger to be able to do that. But Jared's a good dude, man. Real chill, man. Humble guy. I enjoyed kicking the whip.
All right, last one. Gun to your head. Do the Knicks is Mitchell Robinson on this team after the trade deadline?
No. Gun to my head, absolutely not. I just bet that they listen. This Knicks front office has proven that they don't really have a lot of patience, right? Like they'll sit there and they'll watch things unfold, and then once a deal becomes available, right, or once they understand that they need to make something happen, they're gonna pull the trigger on it, right? So you're talking about a guy who's just coming off of a second consecutive stress fracture surgery to his left ankle, right, and now he's got to come on the floor and play, and now you're talking about him coming back in December, but you're also talking about a team that's capped, right? Like they can't really spend money, and their best way to improve the roster is to trade a guy like Mitch. Otherwise, you got to trade a guy like Josh who's making a lot of money. I don't think they're trading Josh, right? You got Precious, but like the easiest way for you to add depth to this roster is to replace 14 million with 2 guys who are making 6.5, right, or 7, or whatever, however you want to split it up. So I think that they end up moving him, but I could be wrong, right? Because like we mentioned, the combination of Cat and Mitch together gives you just such a different dynamic than you'd be able to get without him. So if I had a gun to my head, I'd say he's not on the team by trade deadline, but at the same time, you never know.
Yep. Do the Knicks win the East?
Man. As in, are they finishing the number 1 seed, or as in, are they going to the NBA Finals?
No, go to the finals. We're going to the finals.
Oh, man. It's hard for me to bet against the defending champs, man, because you got to prove to me you could beat them. Can you ask me this after the season opener? Here's how I'll answer that question. If the Knicks go 500 against the Celtics this year, they're going to the NBA Finals.
There we go. All right. Well, hopefully they do that. That would be great. I would like for them to also win the finals. That would also be good for me.
If they do finals, I think they'll win it, right? Because I'm thinking about other teams in the out west. you got a compelling squad, right? But then again, you got guys who have playoff question marks, right? We saw Cat play pretty well down the stretch of that Western Conference Final stretch, but can he do that for an entire playoff run, right? You got some guys who you traded away a guy in Dante who had NBA Finals experience, who won a title, right? You kind of gotta figure a lot of this stuff out. So, but you do have another guy, Mikhail made a Finals run too. I think Landry's part of that team as well. So it'll be interesting, man. I like their chances, but the Celtics are the standard right now, so they got to prove that they can beat them first.
Maybe we'll get an Isaiah Hartenstein homecoming in the finals.
That'd be crazy. Maybe we'll get a Julius Randle homecoming in the finals, right? Imagine Minnesota versus New York in the NBA Finals. That would be tough. Minnesota can do it. Minnesota looks good on paper.
Yeah, I'm not sure Julius is going to be there though for the.
By the deadline.
I think so. I think they did that trade to get off the money. I think they can duck under the second apron if they shave off a little bit more.
Who would you, if you're them, who do you trade them for? What do you get in return?
I'm not sure who. I'd have to because my brain is always I was always thinking about what would I trade Julius for that the Knicks need. So it was never a guard.
Yeah.
Now, I think they need a guard. I know Anthony Edwards is awesome, but I think and Mike Conley is a steady hand. I'm not sure Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham is the point guard platoon to get you to an NBA Finals.
Nah.
I think they need. I think that's their main position, but I don't know what guard they can get. I know that they had interest in DeJounte Murray, but then obviously he just got traded to New Orleans. They're not going to trade with New Orleans.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This is kind of goes back to what we talked about initially. On top of the contract, on top of everything that the appeal of Cat to New York. I think fundamentally, as good a player as Julius Randle is, there's just not a lot of teams that are comfortable being he's not good enough to be your best player if you're trying to win a championship. And then there's concerns about how he fits as a second best player, as good as he is. The same thing is going on with Brandon Ingram in New Orleans. That's why he's extension eligible. There's been nothing there. Really good player, really good player. But these guys there's something about them that is tough for NBA teams to kind of quantify. So look, I think every report that came out after the trade was Dante was kind of the big catch for them. And the pick was nice, and then financial relief. And when I hear all that, I'm I don't know if Julius if they can move him and get something they like, and to get someone under the second apron, I think they will happily do that.
Yeah, I think personally it'd be hard for me if I'm Ant for you to trade Cat away just to be able to trade Julius away. And now you're asking me to go get you 40 a night, right? Because you need somebody else that's going to be able to command a double team and do all that. So that's interesting. I was just looking at their draft pick stats. They don't really have many picks either, so it's not.
They got one way out, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking, can they go get Laurie? Can they add Laurie to the team? That would be compelling if you get able to get off of Julius and bring in a guy like Laurie. But I'm high on Laurie. I like Laurie's game.
Oh, I like Laurie.
Yeah, Laurie's a good player. So this is gonna be a fun year, man. It's gonna be a real fun year.
Oh, it definitely is. Kristian, thank you so much for your time. Let the people know where they can find you and plug anything that you'd like to plug.
Sure, yeah. First place you can find me is if you live in New York and you get the New York Daily News, just go to the sports section, look for the Knicks stuff. You're going to see me. The picture is very old there, right? So the picture that we use on the Daily News does not look like I actually look right now. It's embarrassing. I actually got to call somebody and take a new headshot, right? So that's the first place you can find me as well, is at the New York Daily News. Also at newyorkdailynews.com/sports/basketball/New York Knicks, right? That's one place. Second place, obviously on Twitter at Chris Splash. That's KRISPLASHED. Usually a lot of videos from practice or from shoot around that I post and a lot of quotes, but that's where a lot of my stories go to. So those are the main places you can find me. And third place, obviously, at a Knicks game. If you're at Madison Square Garden, I'll be around. So come check me. And who knows, maybe we'll grab a drink or something.
All right. I have nothing to plug. I will plug all the wonderful work that we've done this week. Check it all out. It's all free for this week on our podcast. So Kristian, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody that tuned in, and go Knicks. I will see you on Monday. Peace.